No more technical issues.
Okay. So I think, sorry, this is my printer. I'm printing the bios. I don't know if that's super loud or not. So I'm going to start us off and I'm going to read the bios for Larry and Ashley. And then Rashee is going to read the bios for Ted and Niquelle. And then we'll hop into the questions. You guys have a copy of the questions. We reordered them a little bit, but we will also, you know, say this is for the journalists, or this is for both directors, or this is for Director Cooks, this is for Director Allen, or whatever, so that, you know, you'll know. And if you don't want to answer a question, that's perfectly fine. If you do, you feel like we're about to move past you, you can just use the raise hand function and we'll come back to you for your response. So I'm just going to, here's the presentation. It should be ready for sharing. Oh, here it is. All right. It's 10:30. So I will go ahead and get started. For our attendees, thanks for being on. If you've been with us all week for Ethics Week, thank you. If this was the only session that you could attend, we appreciate it. Thanks for being here. My name is Asia Stewart-Mitchell. I'm a supervisory attorney with the DC Board of Ethics and Government Accountability's Office of Government Ethics. And today is going to be a panel discussion. We have on the panel the Director of Government Ethics and the Director of Open Government. And also we'll have two journalists joining us. And we're going to be talking about the state of journalism and ethics. And so I will go ahead and start us off by introducing and reading the bios for some of our panelists. So on the panel today, we have Larry Miller. Larry Miller is a multiple Emmy and Edward R. Murrow award-winning dayside news anchor and consumer investigative reporter for WUSA 9 TV. He joined the WUSA 9 team in 2015, anchoring WUSA 9's morning newscast, Get Up DC, and the news at 12 p.m. In 2019, Larry was selected by the National Association of Black Journalists as its Ethel Payne Fellow. He spent 5 days in Johannesburg, South Africa, investigating the country's ongoing discussions around, around land reform and economic implications. Larry has also reported from Berlin, Germany, looking into how the country has changed more than 30 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall. In addition to being a journalist, Larry is also an assistant professor at Prince George's County Community College, where he teaches classes in speech communications and news writing. He holds a Bachelor of Arts in Sociology from the University of Pittsburgh and a Master of Arts in Journalism and Mass Communication from Point Park University. Thanks for being on with us, Larry.
Thanks for having me.
And next we have Ashley Cooks. Ashley Cooks is the director of the Office of Government Ethics at the DC Board of Ethics and Government Accountability, and she has served at the agency in various roles since 2015. Ms. Cooks manages a team of 17 employees. The office specializes in providing ethics training, advice, and enforcement for 37,000 government employees and regulates the district government's financial disclosure statement and lobbying programs. Ms. Cooks is a member of the District of Columbia Bar, the Greater Washington Area chapter of the National Bar Association, the Society of Corporate Compliance and Ethics, and the National Association of Black Compliance and Risk Management Professionals, Incorporated. She received her Juris Doctorate degree from the University of the District of Columbia, David A. Clark School of Law. Thanks for being on, Ashley. We appreciate it.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning. All right, I'll go ahead and introduce our final two panelists. Niquelle M. Allen is the Director of Open Government at the DC Board of Ethics and Government Accountability. Prior to her appointment as Director of Open Government, she served as Senior Policy Advisor and Counsel for the District of Columbia Office of the Chief Technology Officer. She also earned a Chief Information Officer certification from the George Washington University at that time. Director Allen served with distinction as an Assistant Attorney General in the District of Columbia Office of Attorney General. Prior to her service with the government, she practiced law in the private sector. Director Allen earned a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, a Juris Doctorate from North Carolina Central University, and a certificate on the fundamentals of business from Harvard Business School. She is a member of the District of Columbia Bar, the North Carolina Bar, and the Bar of the Supreme Court of the United States. Welcome, Niquelle.
Thank you.
And last but not least, Ted Oberg. Ted is an investigative reporter with the News 4 I-Team. He came to DC after reporting for more than 20 years in Houston. He is most proud of his work exposing mistreatment in jails, uncovering inside deals in local government, and breakdowns in systems upon which our most vulnerable neighbors rely on to stay safe. Ted and his wife are raising 3 teenage daughters. Welcome, Ted.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
All right, Asia, do you want to go right into the questions?
I was on mute and I was talking. All right. Now that we've introduced the panelists, I'll go ahead and go into the questions. So I'm going to display the questions briefly for 20 or 30 seconds and read it off, and then I will stop sharing just so that our panelists will be in a larger view as we have our discussion. All right. Our first question, and this question is for all panelists. Can we agree upon some common definitions for government ethics, open government, and the reasons why we have and need these things? And anybody who wants to
I'll start. I'll start and talk about open government. It's the governing doctrine that emphasizes public participation, transparency, and accountability. A government is considered open when its citizens can access its government proceedings and its government records. As many of you know, the U.S. Constitution protects journalists in particular as watchdogs with the responsibility of holding the government accountable by doing investigative reporting and reporting on the government activities without fear of retaliation or any type of censorship. So I would say an open government in particular recognizes the essential role of the media and provides them with access to its officials, its proceedings, and its records to demonstrate government transparency. And this is important, in my opinion, to make sure the public can trust the government, to make sure the public is able to hold the government accountable, especially this year we're in a voting cycle, and having that information is important so you can make decisions about your government officials.
Thank you, Director Allen. And let me know if you need the question repeated. I can repeat it.
No, I'll go next. I agree with Director Allen has said about open government and transparency. I'll say that government ethics is it's very important for any government, just as well as transparency. It's basically sets standards for employee conduct. It's comprised of rules that employees and public officials must abide by in order for the government to operate effectively and fairly. Those standards, ethics standards, exist to make sure that the government is free of persons engaging in self-dealing, corruption, misuse, and other unethical conduct. So both government ethics and open government are important to ensuring that the public is able to trust the government, to trust that employees are doing their jobs in an ethical manner. So I would say that both are very important to the government, any government, as well as any private sector organization.
Thank you, Director Cooks. Any thoughts from the journalists on open government or government ethics and why we have these things, why we need them?
I'll kick it off here. I think when we think about open government ethics, I mean, for us as journalists, it really is kind of the standards by which these organizations are operating, what they consider to be based on sort of legal definitions of ethical behavior within these sorts of institutions. And then that way, it allows us as journalists to verify if the way in which they are legally required to operate is the way that they are operating. And so then obviously we use a number of different methods of sort of verifying and corroborating that the rules that are clearly laid out in the law are being applied appropriately, and that people can have faith in their government that it's doing what it is charged to do. And if it isn't, then how can these sort of agencies and these actors be held accountable in an appropriate and fair way? So I think the accountability question as well as ethics are important. And obviously we sort of have I think a symbiotic relationship between the government and journalists and trying to make sure that everyone is acting in the best interests of everyone involved, but particularly the stakeholders like those in the community.
And I think Larry brings up a lot of good points. I think all of it has been great. The definitions are helpful. I think there is a sort of a second set of things that we should acknowledge, right? And I think viewers sort of understand what's going on, whether it meets the technical definition of government ethics and open government. I think we all have a sense of fair dealing, and I think I think for me, so often as a journalist, when I think about ethical behavior, it is I think an expectation that viewers and voters know how their government is supposed to operate, and I think it is for courts and folks like other panelists to decide whether it flies afoul of policy rules. But I think our viewers and our voters all have expectations of us that may be slightly less formal, but just as important.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you all. I appreciate your feedback on that one. And I'm going to go to the next question.
This next question is for our journalist. In the era of misinformation and disinformation, how do you maintain the public's trust in your reporting?
You want to start us off on that one?
Sure.
Okay.
Obviously, this is, I think these days, and I assume Larry would agree, one of the most common questions we get asked, right? In the last 5 years, I think this has certainly been something that has been a topic in every newsroom and likely an ongoing conversation all the time. I think to me, it sort of boils down to 7th grade math, and that is show your work. I think we have shifted to writing our investigative pieces such that we tell people exactly where we've gotten information. Even if I can't divulge my source, I'm going to tell you about as much as I can about that person and how they know the information that I'm telling you. I think we try to rely as often as we can on original documents from a government source that are sort of able to be read by viewers and understood from their point of view what it means, and they can decide whether I've interpreted that correctly. I think maintaining that trust is done by sharing as much as we can about the reporting process.
Yeah, I think Ted brings up some good points, and I think certainly from the pandemic on, but particularly during the last administration, I think there really was a call for journalists to sort of step up in different ways, given that the climate that we found ourselves in was a lot more hostile toward us and the work that we do. And so this idea of showing your work became critical. Just recently, I published an investigation on DCD&B, and we talked with a whistleblower as well as 6 other employees who made some pretty alarming allegations about the inner workings of that agency. Now, it would be one thing to not disclose who we spoke with, but we made a point of saying who we spoke to, what was their involvement with the story, and also providing necessary documentation so that people that are reading the story know a couple of things. One, that we were fair in our reporting. Two, that we were thorough. And three, that all of our information and all of the documents were corroborated and verified, not just by us, but by our senior editorial team. And so when we think about demonstrating our work, this is really what we're talking about, is making sure that we're putting all of our cards on the table so that there is no question about the validity and credibility of the work and that everything is airtight. And I think when we think about trust, this is what people deserve to see. This is what people need to see, that the work that we say that we're doing, which is advocating on the public's best interest and holding elected officials accountable, that they're seeing everything that's involved in the sort of making of the sauce so that there's no questions about how we arrived from concept to publication.
Absolutely. And that was for the journalists, but do the directors have anything to add on this question? All right. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Director Allen.
I think that the only thing that I would add is, as far as misinformation and disinformation, I think it's important for journalists to do, as they said, show their sources, make sure that they have that traditional aspect of what it means to be a reporter evident in their work. I think the problem comes that you do have citizen journalists who sometimes do not follow those things, and that information, they have a megaphone now with social media, and that information spreads very quickly. And I think it's important for journalists to in the traditional sense, to be identified and be out there as the sources of information that can be relied upon.
And if I can add one thing, because I think Niquelle brings up such a critical point, because this thing has frustrated me to no end. Because people get on Instagram, TikTok, and say whatever the hell they want to say and think that they know what they're talking about, and they don't. I think the difference between what we do as professional journalists and what our citizen journalists do, which provides, I think, a critical perspective, is that we go through rigorous editorial standards to get our stories published. There is incredible vetting that takes place, going through all of our documents, asking important questions from every legal perspective, making sure that we're not speaking to one person, but we're speaking to multiple people to corroborate that the allegations that are being raised in particular departments and certain communities are things that are being corroborated by other people that are not necessarily close to, but maybe adjacent to it in some regard. We are trained professionals that work on this every single day. And there is a huge and clear distinction between what we do and what people on Twitter and the rest of the social spaces are doing on a daily basis. And while, we are certainly dealing with an industry and a climate that is changing rapidly, given the sort of technological advances that we're having in the space, what we do matters, and our credibility is critical to us and important to us. And so I do appreciate what some of those citizens journalists do kind of on their own space of at least kind of bringing the issue to the forefront. There is a difference, however, of bringing an issue to the forefront and then making sure that that issue has all the necessary context so that everyone understands how that issue plays in a broader scheme of what the community is dealing with, and then how do we move that issue forward.
Thank you so much. All right. Next question. And this question is for Dr. Cooks, I believe. Ashley, what are your office's transparency limitations as it pertains to confidential ethics investigations?
Sure. So most of our investigations are preliminary investigations, which are confidential until the board makes them public. Even our Ethics Act, which is our enabling statute, provides that those preliminary investigations are confidential and that the identity of the individual who is the subject of the investigation shall not be disclosed without their consent or until the board has found reason to believe that an ethics violation has occurred, and revealing or making that investigation public will not affect or harm the investigation. So given the statute, given our regs, I am very limited on the amount of information that I can provide regarding preliminary investigations. When I'm asked whether we have an investigation regarding a certain employee, I cannot even acknowledge whether we have it because of our statute. And that is for good reason, because not all ethics violations, not all ethics complaints are substantiated. And individuals who are accused of violations, we like to afford them any type of due process and fairness rights. You know, they have rights to a fairness. So we would never want to harm someone's reputation in the process of investigating. And then it turns out that the person has not actually engaged in unethical conduct. So there are very good reasons why we have preliminary confidential investigations. Also, I have some background noise. I hear some feedback. If you could mute yourself. Also, there's also concerns with conducting preliminary confidential investigations of negatively impacting the integrity of the investigation. If we decide to publicize it, because we risk evidence getting destroyed or lost, we risk witnesses starting to collaborate with each other, or witnesses disappearing. So there's that aspect of it. But outside of those confidential preliminary investigations, we also handle formal investigations, which are public. A formal investigation can be initiated within my office based on a sworn complaint, a finding by the Office of the Inspector General, a finding by a court of civil liability, or an indictment. So we do have some public investigations, and the board actually announces those public investigations during our board meeting, and they're posted on our website and posted in our meeting minutes. I'm able to acknowledge those investigations, but I still cannot give any type of facts that are subject to the investigation without a disposition. Despite our limitations with preliminary investigations, we do have some transparency with investigations. We post a quarterly complaint report that includes our open and closed complaints, open preliminary investigations, open formal investigations, closed matters, matters that are referred to other agencies, matters that may be stayed at the time. And that report includes a case number, it includes a description of the allegations, as well as a disposition for those matters that are closed. It still does not include a respondent's full name, with the exception of matters that are public or investigations that have been resolved through negotiated disposition. Our negotiated dispositions, I'm sure some of you may be familiar with them. They're posted on our website. They have the respondent's first name redacted, but their last name is visible. And basically, it's a settlement agreement. It's an actual document between myself and the respondent that is approved by the board. It contains the facts of the case, of the investigation, violations, rules, and the fine amount that the employee has agreed to pay. So they are posted on our website. So we do try to have some transparency in our investigations through that quarterly complaint report, our negotiated dispositions, board orders, and things of that nature. But we have limitations because of our statute of what we can reveal about confidential matters.
Thank you. Anybody else have any follow-up questions on that, or any comments? All right.
Okay, I think this next question is mainly for our journalists. But to what degree do you believe the district government is transparent as it pertains to journalistic inquiry and public information? Now, this might be good to hear from directors as well as for a perspective from outside the government and from inside the government. But if you'd like to start with our journalists.
Larry, go ahead.
Okay. I will say that, I've been at Channel 9 for 10 years now, that some agencies are better than others. I will tell you that I've had quite a lot of experience with various agencies, and some are really easy to work with when it comes to getting information, and there are others that are a bit slow to respond and are a little challenging at times. My experience with BEGA was pretty awesome. We were able to have some really open and candid conversations, kind of being able to address some of the concerns that I had, and we were able to kind of talk about how do we move forward. At least so I had some better clarity about sort of what the procedures were and the statutes were as relates to the ability to get information related to my particular case. So, I would say that overall, I think there are some agencies that do a fabulous job of trying to respond to the request of journalists, and I think there's other agencies that, there leaves some room for improvement. I think ultimately the public deserves to have information given in a orderly and an appropriate amount of time, especially when those requests are sent in. I think DC does have a fairly organized fashion for getting information, but whether that information actually gets to you sometimes can be a little bit tenuous. But I do appreciate the work that some of the agencies are doing to try to respond to journalist requests. I know that they get a lot, but it does go a long way. But there are some agencies that are quite difficult to work with, and there are some that do an exceptionally good job of being responsive.
I think Larry is probably right. Look, journalism is a relationship business, and I think those agencies that we have better relationships with, it's easier to get information from them. I am not quite certain where the seesaw would fall on the number of agencies who are helpful and prompt versus the ones who sort of drag their feet in DC. I would give an incomplete grade on that at best. When it comes to the formal process of transparency and open government, DC has a robust FOIA law. I am not completely certain that anyone, any FOIA officer in DC believes that there is penalty or repercussion for not following the timelines and guidelines of the FOIA law. And DC is not alone in that. Look, I put in something for records from Montgomery County. Maryland's statute is 30 days and they should turn over the information. It took 615 days to get a list of carjackings. That is not government secrets. And I get it. Government agencies are short-staffed, but I do think DC needs to do a better job of living up to the promises it makes in its FOIA law.
Well, I agree with you there, Ted, and that's why our office exists. We try to make sure we educate FOIA officers on their obligations and what they need to do and being timely. But, as far as DC being transparent in general, I remember when I was a young attorney, I would see journalists walking around, with their notepads. I'm a Gen Xer. So it's a part of education you kind of get as a government official that these folks are here, they're watching, you get to know them. I think just like Ted said, I think that's essential for transparency, for folks to get to know the press and not to be afraid of them. I think there is a lot of fear amongst government officials and employees that they're going to say or do the wrong thing. But the onus is on us to make sure that we are open and transparent and we're following the law.
Can I add one other point? And I think my suspicion is, and I never can see sort of behind the curtain what happens after I put in a request to any agency in DC or otherwise. My only encouragement would be to stop playing chess. If Larry or I ask a question, I think we want the answer to that question. And my sense is many times there's sort of a deciphering that goes on. And well, what is Ted really asking? If I'm really asking something, I'll tell you. Most of us don't have time to sort of play games. I think, you know, we ask for the information we want, and I would only encourage Director Allen, as you point out, to get to know us and feel free having a conversation with us. We're not awful people.
Yeah, and if I can just add one more thing on to Ted's point, I think like opportunities like these matter, right? I think when we can actually spend time with each other and actually develop a relationship, you get to know that, like, yes, Ted and I are committed journalists, but we're also really nice people too. And we want to play nice in the sandbox because it's beneficial for all of us to do that. I have a job to do, you have a job to do. I respect what you do, you respect what I do, and I just want to kind of do the best that I can and kind of work within the parameters and be respectful, but also do what I need to do. So I think there's kind of opportunities on both sides. And I think to Ted's point, also just ask the kind of poignant questions. If I'm looking for something in particular, I'm usually going to get what I need. So we don't need to kind of like do the whole back and forth thing. So if we ask for something, tell us what we're looking for. And if we are trying to get to something else that maybe we may not be asking for it correctly, or there might be some sort of technical issue there, it would be helpful if you let us know so that we could, sorry, we're having a time here in the newsroom today. It would be important to sort of help us out too, to help kind of expedite our work, because sometimes there are these sort of technical issues that come up. We may not be asking for something correctly, or it might be off by something very slight and minor. If you're able to kind of help us with that, that would be helpful as well.
Yeah, and I don't think we didn't mention it up top, but that's how Larry and I met, is he sent a FOIA request to the Office of Open Government, and we just started talking through that, and he told me he went to the Olympics, and we chatted about that, and then finally we got to talking about the request. And if, you know, and I can be pretty clear and, you know, tell him, like, I can't give you that information, but like Ashley was explaining about the quarterly complaint report, I can tell you where the information that can be found will be found.
Yeah, so that's just to piggyback on that. That's why at BEGA we post a lot of the stuff on our website. Like we post our employees' public financial disclosure statement filings. We post lobbyist registrations and activity reports, because we know that sometimes, you know, you may be looking for something, but you may not know exactly what you're looking for. So we just try to make everything readily available on our website, so that you don't even have to come to us. You just go to our website and find it.
Mm-hmm. And I'm always happy to entertain the questions too, of like, I can't find it. Does that mean it doesn't exist? Or sometimes with the financial disclosure system, the search is, you know, you have to kind of tweak certain things to find exactly what you're looking for. And I'm always happy to help somebody talk through that.
All right. Thank you, everyone. All right. I believe this question is for Director Allen. What are some suggested best practices for agencies to be more transparent?
Oh, thanks for that question. I think the first thing I would recommend is engaging with the public and soliciting their feedback. A participatory government inspires buy-in with your agency's processes and policies. So you should always be reaching out to the public, finding out what their concerns are, and finding out what they need from you. The second thing is maximizing the use of online tools, which has been mentioned here just previously. Make sure that your records are available online, especially those ones that are legally supposed to be there. And your data should be there as well. That's going to show the public and others that you don't have anything to hide, that you're trying to be transparent. And when you're in the public, when you're in a public hearing or when you're having a meeting, minimize what you do behind closed doors. Use those exemptions to the Open Meetings Act only when they're truly necessary. Don't do them to avoid scrutiny or the press. They should be used for what they actually are there for. And if you don't have to use them, maybe you shouldn't. Again, but there's a perception we're doing things behind closed doors, that we're not being transparent. And kind of as Director Cook said, make sure as an agency, all those public disclosures are available, that you're able to point to where they are, so that people aren't thinking your officials are being unduly influenced. Tell people where this stuff is. Budgets as well. Make sure, you don't have to always rely on one agency to have your budget information online. You can put it online. People should be able to see where the money's spent and whether or not you're being influenced as a government official. I mean, that's just important and key to transparency. And when you're looking at confidential information, just like Director Cook said, make sure you have a policy that's out there, that you show what the law is, that you explain to folks why you can't release that information. I think giving more information is always better than withholding. And again, you need to make sure you have your procedures publicly available. That all of those things show that you're at least trying to be transparent. And again, that will save you some time. If your information is already out there, then folks can just do their research, and they may not have to make a FOIA request. You can just point them to the website if you do talk to them and say, hey, this is where that information is. And that will make your life a lot easier, and again, will inspire trust in the government and show that you're transparent.
Thank you, Director Allen. Anybody else have any follow-up on that? Questions or comments? Any thoughts on how you think we can be more transparent?
I would say, I think this is more of a mindset than a checklist. I think if you think transparency first, as opposed to coming to the end of the process and figuring out what we need to have posted along the way to make sure that we complied, I think you'll come out with a better result. I think anytime we see as journalists a government agency anywhere that has sort of gone out of its way to use legal ways to withhold information or hold meetings in private, and then has to explain it, it is A, a better story for us, but B, not a better outcome for you as a government agency. And I just think if government were to think of transparency first as opposed to expediency first, I think we might have a better result on the transparency and open government front.
Thank you. Anybody else? Before we go to the next question? All right.
Now, we may have touched on this a little bit, but this is primarily for our journalists. How can DC government be better stewards of information to cultivate the public trust?
Yeah, I think we did touch on it a little bit, but I would just kind of reiterate, clarity and consistency go a long way, right? I think as it relates to the sort of dissemination of information, being clear about what the statutes allow DC government to do as it relates to dispersing and disseminating information to journalists, being clear about what the constraints are, and being clear about when it will be available in some form, whether redacted or in its entirety. And I think that goes a long way in helping to elevate credibility, elevate trust, and then it allows us journalists to do our jobs effectively as well. Because ultimately, it's going to come out, right? Like the issues eventually come to the forefront. People end up talking. The documents end up becoming available. We wind up always getting a copy of something. And so it kind of just is like a waste of time, like trying to like hide and conceal. So you might as well just go ahead, as my mother would say, and just say what you need to say when you need to say it. And I think the more that we can do a better job of doing that and being comfortable doing that, it goes a long way, and it doesn't waste anyone's time in the process.
Larry, you're exactly right. I also I think if I could just one more note, I think Director Allen, you talked about publishing your data. In DC, I think as journalists, we're lucky in that a lot of data is legally required to be posted. But I think we fall down and get frustrated because there are a number of agencies who don't post what is legally required by the time in which it is required. And so reports get to be a year late on hiring or firing or complaints or whatever else. And I think that's a knock at credibility right on the first question. You know, why the law says you're supposed to do this? Why haven't you done it? I think if that stuff were there, I think we'd get rid of some of those uneasy conversations right at the outset.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And we just put a reminder out to our FOIA officers to check on that information to make sure that it's on their websites. I think definitely DC government, just in general, we need to embrace technology and use it. I think there's somewhat of a learning curve there with some of our agencies, and we have agencies of different sizes, and not an excuse, just kind of what's happening. And I think kind of our inefficiencies lead us to look like we're trying to hide things when, again, it may just be that someone doesn't know the right place to go, doesn't know this is part of their duty. So just as a government as a whole, I think we've got to do better with that, and especially with embracing our technology.
All right. Any final comments on that before we go to the next question? Next question. As you pursue the separate missions of your offices, how do you maintain the public's trust? And this is for all panelists. We touched on this in different forms, but how do you specifically, and if there's anything special that you do to maintain the public's trust, we talk about that.
I would say just by ensuring that basically that the agency BEGA fulfills its mission. I believe that by educating employees on the rules and the boundaries and providing them with advice, that increases compliance with the ethics standards and thereby reduces ethics violations, which then lead to increasing the public's trust in district government operations. Also holding employees and public officials accountable for their actions. Not only it penalizes that particular employee, it warns other employees of conduct that violates the rules, but it also shows the public that there is an agency that is putting ethics at the forefront of government operations. So I think that in those ways, I have helped to maintain the public's trust in district government by enforcing the ethics rules.
I would say with respect to the Office of Open Government, we maintain the public trust by fostering a culture of internal accountability. I encourage my staff to be diligent about their follow-up, their contact, and their communication with people who contact our office. They're also accountable for their own actions and decisions. I have an open door policy as a director, and I encourage open communication with me. And in that sense, I'm leading by example with how, I expect OOG to interact with the public. We also publish as much information as possible on our website, open-dc.gov, so people can get the information they need about our operations. And we've also done an extensive amount of outreach. We've built collaborative relationships with stakeholders in the open government space. We talk to public interest groups. We talk to other government agencies. We kind of put ourselves out there for people to engage with us. And that's how we are trying to make sure our own operations are transparent and maintain the public trust.
I think for us, I think it's always important to remind ourselves that accountability goes two ways. And if we're to hold you accountable, I think we need to hold ourselves accountable as well. I would encourage any government employees on the phone to look, if you're ever the subject of reporting and you think you've been done wrong, look, certainly complain to your coworkers, but call the journalist as well. I'm not a hard guy to find, and I take all calls and respond to all emails about concerns or questions about the way we've done reporting. If we get something wrong, we'll own up to that online forever and ever, that, hey, we've changed this story because of, here are the changes. I think accountability is a two-way road. And I think the way we build that between each other is to call each other out when we fall short, and journalists should not be immune from that.
Anybody else? All right, I just wanted to say that I agree with Director Allen, her response. I think relationships are really important. Just in my job, I'm the supervisory attorney. I supervise the attorney advisor team in the Office of Government Ethics. And relationships are really important. And we're kind of internal in that we interpret the rules and advise district government employees. But by doing that, by fostering those relationships and educating them, and when they contact us, not judging them and giving them options, not always saying, no, you absolutely not, you can't do this, but maybe there's a different way to do this thing and make sure that it's ethical. Those things are really important, and you end up getting a result and an outcome that serves the public and ends up fostering the public's trust. And I'm not a panelist, but I just wanted to add that because I think the relationships are really important.
Okay. This is for everyone. Do you believe agencies such as BEGA and the Office of the Inspector General have helped to curb corruption in the district?
I don't want to be the first to answer, so I'll let someone else go. I think my answer is obvious, so I'll let someone else.
I'll start us off. We had some conversations about this question too, which I think are interesting. And it is a fair one, but also slightly loaded as well. I do think that BEGA and the Office of the Inspector General have done a good job in being transparent as they possibly can within the framework that DC law allows. I do think that corruption, however, exists outside of those agencies. And so I think the offices are really bound by what they can do and trying to be transparent. But I think the corruption, if we kind of use that word, and it's kind of harsh in some cases and appropriate in others, is going to happen regardless, right? And I think what the offices do, however, is help journalists like myself and Ted be sure that the information that we do need in telling a comprehensive story is available to us so that we can be fair to everyone involved. And I think ultimately that's the important thing. I'm not sure if the office has the responsibility to weed out corruption. It does have a responsibility to be transparent about what's going on in government so that people can make decisions about whether or not the government that they have elected is working for them in the way that it should be.
I think you bring up good points. Larry, I think the two things. One, we don't know what you've stopped because people know you're there, or because cases have been settled before they become public. So I think, which leads to my second point, is I believe agencies like BEGA and the OIG in some ways serve as the angel on our shoulder to remind us of our better judgment. And so while I think, as Larry points out, the framework within which your offices operate as it comes to formal complaints and investigations may be somewhat limiting. I do think the vast majority of the 37,000 people who work for DC government could use someone to be their champion in the ethics forum to say, look, 36,990 of them are doing everything according to the rules. And to remind us of that, because I think when incidents happen, the very high profile indictment of a council member is just one example. But when those things happen, I think we don't hear a lot of people standing up for the vast majority of DC employees who are doing the right thing. And I think it would be helpful for someone to speak up, even if it's very limited in what you can say because of a pending investigation. I do think that DC employees deserve to have someone who can be their champion within the government to remind us all of how important this is.
My answer to the question is yes. I do believe that BEGA and the Inspector General, of course, help to curb corruption in the district. I mean, BEGA was born because of corruption. So at that time, there was mass corruption. Several elected officials had been indicted, were taking bribes for taking bribes, and there was nepotism was rampant within the district government, among other things. So we were born as a result. We were created as a result of that corruption. And I do think the government has moved past that particular part, and that overall we're doing much better when it comes to ethics and transparency. So we still have some ways to go, but as we've all stated, it's no way that we can ever extinguish all corruption within the district government. But what we can do is educate employees. We can hold those accountable, those folks who violate the rules. We can hold those people accountable. We can be that champion for the 36,999 who are doing the right thing, which is it's displayed in our investigations. Like I stated when I talked about my limitations for confidential investigations, the vast majority of those investigations are dismissed for a lack of evidence. So there are employees out there who are doing the right thing and who are aware of the rules. But overall, I think that when you think about a government, just picture it without a BEGA or without an IG, and I don't think that will be a very efficient or effective government. So yes, these agencies do work.
And I'll add from the perspective of an employee, I've been working for DC government since 2002. So I was an employee when there was not a BEGA. So I can attest to the change that having a group of folks who train you on ethics has made in your service as a government employee. You cannot say you don't know, you don't understand, you haven't heard, you don't know what the rules are. So I, personally, this is not me speaking as director, but personally as employee, I've seen an improvement in DC government over time. I know for externally, it seems like we take 5 steps forward and then 7 steps backwards. But we are making progress, I think, as far as being accountable and being ethical, because we do know that these agencies are here and they're providing education and training, and I do think that it's made an impact.
All right. So for the journalists, walk us through your approach to obtaining information from district government agencies, the legislature, and the courts. And that's in instances where there's an information officer or a public relations officer, and when there is not one.
Yeah, do you want to start us off, or you want me to?
Sure.
Yeah.
So as I think about, I mean, I think it varies with every story. I will say in DC, there are very few agencies without a public information officer. The ones who don't have one, honestly, I think sometimes can be more efficient because they're not playing that chess that I was talking about earlier. They get the request and they know they can give it or they can't. The second set is sort of as a general rule. I am not a guy who sneaks around a whole lot. Once I determine that there is a story that I want to know, I typically come in the front door. I'll call whomever the person is and say, here's what the question I have. What can you tell me about it? Can we talk on background at first? Which means I'm not going to record their conversation. I'm going to take notes, but not attribute it to anyone. I typically will not put in a FOIA request first with the hope that the agency will turn over the information that I'm looking for. If we don't get it or I can't get a call back, then I'll submit the FOIA and we'll start that process. It is not in practice, neither here nor in any of the places I've reported, typically overnight for FOIA requests. So I tend not to rely on that a whole lot. But then I think once we start getting information, the real reporting happens, and that's when you're calling people who aren't the official source for the agency, or you're calling people you know, or people who used to work for them, or people who interact with the agency. And so I think once we hear from the agency first, then we sort of go and try and corroborate either the tip we've heard or the information we've had. And then obviously before we ever air anything, well before we ever air anything, and we're going back to that agency to say, hey, here's what we found. Let's sit down and talk about this, hopefully on camera, to sort of explain what it is we're looking at, give us the context that we're missing. As an investigative reporter, it is very rare that I'll get a story at 11:25 in the morning and have it on the air at 4 o'clock this afternoon. So we take our time with stuff. We're corroborating stuff. We're making sure we include the context, and that is a series of conversations with people inside and outside the agency.
Yeah, no, I think Ted is spot on, and my process works much the same. I spend a little bit more time on the front end vetting those that come up with certain tips and those that are sort of kind of logic allegations against specific departments. I spend a lot of time vetting them, going through their allegations, finding information, looking for all the details. And once I feel that I have enough and I've done all of my necessary interviews and I've been able to verify and corroborate things, at least on my end, that's when I then go to the agency to give them an opportunity to respond and talk with them. I'll go to the agency multiple times. One, to try to get an on-camera interview, then to get a statement, and then I actually go back a third time and say, listen, I got your statement. I really want to make sure that this is fair. If you can give us an on-camera interview to sort of balance out the conversation, that would be helpful. Certainly, each department has their own sort of protocols about whether or not they're going to do on-camera interviews, but I do give multiple opportunities for them to come forward and to provide someone that can speak on that specific issue. My experience has been that typically most agencies within DC government have a person with whom I can speak with directly to get information from. I talked about the investigation that we just published on DC DMV. The young woman that I had been corresponding with for several weeks was incredibly helpful, very responsive, and we were able to go back and forth. And while I was asking some tough and candid questions, she was more than willing to give me the information that I was looking for, or at least point me in the right direction of where I should be able to get the information. And so I think probably one of the most helpful things I think for those that are watching today is that there really shouldn't be any fear between us. Yes, I may not always be coming on the best of terms, but I am always coming in good faith to try to make sure that the DC government's perspective is well articulated and understood, and that it is sort of balancing out the story that we're working on, and that we have all the context necessary so that our reporting is fair and thorough.
Larry, can I ask you a follow-up?
Yeah.
How do you think a written statement hurts viewers' understanding of a complete story as opposed to an interview?
Right. I mean,
file that under loaded question, but
right.
I am interested in your thought.
Here's the thing, and I'll go back to the story that we just published. We had a person who came forward with specific allegations against the DC DMV. In that interview, you got their sort of emotion about their experience working there. We got to hear specifically from this person about the allegations that they say took place within that agency and how they say that they were asked to do things that were illegal according to DC law. That is their understanding of that. When we get a written statement from the DCDV regarding these allegations that are not only laid out by one person, but corroborated by 6 others, and we get this sort of written words, it doesn't give someone at home enough to say whether or not the government is being as transparent and open as they should. Because what you have is sort of all these people that are coming forward saying this one thing, and you have maybe 30 or 40 words in a statement. It just doesn't balance it out, because what resonates with people at home is emotion. It is the sort of tone in their voice. All of these nonverbal forms of communication are critical when people are assessing someone's credibility and honesty and truthfulness. And getting a 30-word statement, while it may be convenient for the agency, raises more eyebrows about whether or not the things that are being said about what they were doing are in fact true. That it leads people to believe that those things are in fact true, because it seems like they have something to hide, because they haven't put someone forward to talk about it openly and honestly. Because in an interview with a DC government employee, we can go back and forth and I can ask those important follow-up questions in real time, so that people feel that the journalist who is there as an objective bystander in all of this, that's trying to piece this all together, is asking fair questions of everyone involved. But in the statement that I get from the agency, I'm not able to do that, and so I'm limited. And it is a poor reflection on the agency, and then raises more questions about why is the agency not coming forward in an honest and open way.
I think that's exactly right. And I think it brings it back to where we started, that ethics and accountability can have one sort of legal and formal definition in government rules, and a second set for what viewers' expectations are about ethical and open government.
Thank you. And that's our hour. We didn't have any time for questions from the attendees. I didn't see anything in the chat, but feel free to reach out to us. And wait a minute, and just that quickly, there's something in the chat. All right, we have a comment in the chat. Trusting government is tied to trust in the press. Surely not from any of the panelists. A lot of what is being touted as journalism is passing on the lies that are liars are saying, with an essentially meaningless fact check disclaimer. I think we touched on this, kind of talking about disinformation and misinformation.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think there is an interesting question there. Is it ethical for a journalist to report what they know are lies? No, it's not.
Yep.
And to be clear, when we're getting information from whistleblowers, from those that are lodging allegations about specific agencies and or departments, these things are getting fact checked rigorously, because we're not just relying on one person to tell us something that happened to them. We're talking to 10 other people that have to give us the same account of what is going on, and that we need corroborating evidence to support these allegations as well. So understand that while some of these things that are coming forward are difficult to hear, it does not mean that because they are difficult to hear that they have not been corroborated substantially through documents, through additional interviews, through all types of other evidence and corroborating information as well.
Absolutely. I got another question in the chat. As a DC government employee, are we allowed to talk to a journalist?
I think that has to do with the policy of your office. I know some
Yes.
offices have a policy where they say, we want, things going through a particular person. I would check with your agency.
And
Yeah.
I'll add that there is an official spokesperson for the government. It's usually the public information officer, and that might be what that is referring to. So it's not meant to shut you up completely in life, but there are only certain people who can speak on behalf of the agency and make official statements on behalf of the government.
That said, this is a town that is built on conversations that never make it to the light of a front page or television. And my email is in the chat. And if you want to talk to a reporter, no one ever has to know. And
Mhm.
but look, it is an important piece of this town that conversations are had between government employees and journalists all the time that no one ever knows about.
I want to thank all of our panelists. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, and I would just quickly add to Ted's point that those conversations are helpful, right? Because it may not result in a story today, but it may lead us down a path 2 months from now, a year from now, that might allow us to hold government accountable in ways that we were not able to before. So I think it's important, as Ted said, to have a conversation with us. And again, we can do this confidentially off the record. But those conversations are helpful because it allows us to know, where do we need to dig? Where do we need to go?
All right. So thank you all so much. We appreciate it. This was a really robust conversation. I appreciate it, and I'm kind of excited because, as you said, I think it's important for us to be having these conversations, and now we know each other. And I can attest, having never met Larry and Ted in person, but in knowing them for several days only, they're very nice people.
So please,
So thanks, everybody.
all of their work, they're both great journalists.
Agreed.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. This is great.
All right. Thank you all. I'm going to go
Thank
ahead and
you.
keep this one, and you'll be receiving your confirmations in the email shortly. Thank you all.
Thanks.
Bye, guys. Thank you.